looking at Rich Little and his amazing command of voices and the success he had in the States, I've often wondered, why didn't Max Ferguson go down and do that? You had a head start on Rich Little by a number of years in this case.
The flip answer there, Percy, is to say, oh, I'm going to stay in Canada. I don't want to go. Because everybody who hears me say that would immediately say, yeah, give him an offer and see. So I wouldn't dare say it. But I have had the offer. And in much more straitened circumstances than I am now. I've had a good living in Canada. I can't complain the least. But in my struggling days, I got a letter from a big wheel and television was just starting on the West Coast. He'd read about this little item in Variety, and he sent this letter that American television can use you, and you can use American television, and I was to fly down. And there wasn't the slightest compunction in writing back and saying I wasn't interested. But I'm self-conscious about saying this because, you know, everybody says, well, if he's tempted, he'll go. I'll tell you why in a nutshell, Percy, and that goes back to the McCarthy era. Sure, you can go down and you hear these fantastic figures, and they're making thousands a week, probably more you make here. In the first place, I'm happy with what I'm making here. But that McCarthy era was a great object lesson to me. There were a lot of my counterparts in the States doing satire and good satire. When the McCarthy era hit and the investigations were going on, there wasn't a sound coming out of them. And I went on without any restrictions as I always had. And that was, the point was driven home very forcibly then that there are a lot more important considerations than the remunerative end of the business, the complete freedom of that.
You never had any censorship then imposed on you in any sense?
No. You know, the closest I've had, mind you, in return for this, I try to exercise tact. I don't think I've ever viciously, I think even Mr. Diefenbaker was quoted as saying, it was relayed to me by a close confidant of his, that, one thing about Ferguson, his satire is gentle. Well, it isn't always gentle, but I don't think it's ever vicious. And I've tried in return for what I think is a very free hand they've given me not to abuse this. If I ever went out and, you know, seized on some political figure and made him look like a complete idiot and a dishonest or something like that, I'd be asking for everything I'd get, and I probably would get put off the air. But the only thing that borders on criticism was the day Stalin died. And a CBC executive whose name will be unmentionable.
Most of them are.
Met me in the hall as I was going down. He said, I trust you're not going to do a skit on Stalin's death. And I felt a little peeved, you know, as if they wouldn't give me enough credit for having that much discretion. I was going to make a skit out of anybody's death. But they were just sort of, you know, in case I might have been thinking of. That's the closest, really, to...
But any other topic, the atom bomb, race, racism, anything?
I heard once they were a little put out with a skit that I did involving the Vietnam thing and Johnson, that they caused them a little embarrassment. Mind you, I don't hear too much about it, but I guess the front line and the brass in Ottawa get smacked in the face and the letters and everything else, and they have to fend off the protests. And by the time it filters down to me, the crisis has passed. But I think they've had a few little run-ins with people objecting to some of the skits.
Yeah, but you once got in a big hassle in Parliament when an MP tore a piece off you. But this wasn't because you were doing some bit of criticism he didn't like.
No, that was just because he said that this was a program of meaningless ravings and tripe disguised in the poorest possible English, an insult to the intelligence of all thinking Canadians. And I loved that because of the irony of an MP objecting to poor English, you know, because when you read Hansard, you're not...
There's a lot of meaningless tripe.
That the English in there isn't always of the best.
What happened to the gentleman, rest his soul?
I don't really know. It all blew over. That was a mild one. I had one since then that could have been more serious, and that was when I saw my picture on the front page of the Montreal papers, cheek by jowl with Robert Thompson, accusing me of a seditious influence disrupting the friendly relations of the United States and Canada. And that was all over a skit that was so heavy-handed, so much of a burlesque, I didn't think anybody would take anything. I mean, some of my skits are satirical, sure, but this was complete burlesque. The news story that morning, they were going to reenact the Battle of Lundy's Lane. And I had Pearson and Johnson sitting there, and everything was nice. The British redcoats there advancing, Pearson saying, it's very colorful, Mr. Johnson. Yes, I think it's quite interesting. And suddenly, here in the midst of a little musketry from the era of the early 1800s, you suddenly hear the great jets and the rockets and the pom-pom guns and everything. And Pearson will go, good heavens, these are modern-day tanks and jets coming in. Johnson's line is, yeah, we lost it once. We're not going to miss on our second chance. The thing was, they're using modern weapons. Now, what could be more burlesque than that? But they saw, Mr. Thompson saw in this, a seditious undermining of relations.
I think you were contemplating moving to England, were you not?
Yes, I was. That was a very impetuous thing. We looked at Country Life magazine. I kept looking at... real estate has always been rather high in Halifax. My wife, look at this place, 15 rooms and a big spread like that for about $11,000, the equivalent of $11,000. Stables, tennis courts. So I said, gee, let's go to England. My wife said, yes. So we went to bed thinking once the cold reality of dawn came in, pipe dreams had vanished. But they were still there the next morning. And that day, I sold the house, sold the car, and booked us all in to go to England. And strange enough, that a week later, I was going at the end of that summer of 58. And Ross, the summer Ross McLean phoned me and said, would you like to come up and join the tabloid staff? And I said to him, thank you very much, Ross. I appreciate the invitation, but I'm quite happy. Plans on going to England. And I had no intention of coming. My wife worked on me one night. We were watching television. And it was 2 days after Ross had phoned. I said, oh, incidentally, during one of the commercial breaks, I said, Ross McLean phoned today and asked me to come up and join the 701 staff. And she said, oh, would you like to go? And I said, no, I want to go to England. So we watched the rest of the late-night movie. The next commercial comes along, and she said, well, you know, Max, it's better to have something definite lined up in Toronto than go to England with our 5 children, nothing lined up. And I said, oh, no. That commercial finished. Each commercial, she gave me one more of a little argument. You know what the final clincher was? Sitting there, it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, the last commercial was on, said, Max, and she wanted to go up to Toronto, you see. You realize that if we go to England, your bulldog will have to be in quarantine 6 months? All right, we'll go. I gave up on that account.